And welcome back. The Bronx Community Foundation is the first and only community foundation in the Bronx solely dedicated to delivering resources to the borough. By enabling collaboration amongst residents, community organizations, and institutions, as well as engaging elected officials, the organization strives to fill those gaps to improve the quality of life. Joining us now, we're pleased to have on the show the Bronx Community Foundation President and CEO, Dr. Meisha Porter. And Dr. Porter, thank you for being with us.
Thank you for having me. Excited to be here today.
Yeah, well, excited to have you. And for those that may not be familiar, the Bronx Community Foundation really is an arm that really pumps gas into much of the community and a lot of the organizations that the Bronx serves. So talk to us a little bit about the Community Foundation and the work that you do.
So, I think you did a great job of kicking off who we are. And we are the first and only community foundation in the Bronx. And, it is about time for the Bronx to have the things that exist in every community. And it's really important to note the foundation was founded in 2017 and ideated by our founders, Derek and Desmond Lewis, who are from the Bronx. But as the pandemic hit, we sprang into action and distributed millions of dollars in resources, including meals, grants to small businesses, technology to schools, funding to justice-involved Bronxites. We supported housing groups and hospitals and directly provided funding to residents. And now we are at the crossroads of the foundation where we are ready to be a distributor of resources Bronx-wide to ensure that folks who are proximate to our community's problems or concerns or proximate to the solutions actually have resources to make those solutions a reality.
And when we talk about reality, I want to talk about the reality of COVID, because COVID has been what we're still dealing with and still trying to overcome. For a lot of residents, the struggle is real, whether it's food insecurity, whether it was vaccination hesitation, those things have been real. But then also for organizations themselves with boots on the ground, some of them are almost forced to close their doors. Some of them saw a lack of services. Talk to us about the work that you've done in sustaining and really upholding these during this time.
Well, some of the work that the foundation did during that time was supporting nonprofit payrolls, supporting small businesses, and really trying to ensure that we kept our businesses and especially our nonprofits going. And I think it's important to note tomorrow's National Nonprofit Day, and we're celebrating that day with the Borough President's Office, Deputy Mayor Sheena Wright, and our Comptroller, Brad Lander. And what we did in the pandemic was to continue to support nonprofits so that they could continue doing their work. But what's important about tomorrow is the celebration. We call them nonprofits, but what they actually do is the most profitable work. And that's ensuring that services, resources are delivered to the folks in our community. And so many of the folks that do that work are from our community. And so the foundation wants to be a partner in making sure that we create sustainable options for community members to have access to food, to have access to services, to have access to resources, to have access to supports, all of the things we need to keep our community strong and thriving.
Yeah. Dr. Porter, I want you to take a moment, because when we talked at the beginning of the show, we talk about this is a show that takes a look at a lot of the inequities that people face. And this pandemic has really highlighted and really driven home a lot of the inequities that people face, particularly in communities of color. Share with us a little bit about how you see these inequities and what your approach is right now.
Well, what we all know is the pandemic, particularly in the Bronx, only highlighted inequities that existed pre-pandemic. And, so many, I say to folks over and over again, if we had a conversation 10 years ago about a pandemic coming to New York City or coming to the world, as it would be most disproportionately impacted in those moments. And the Bronx would have been at the top of the list at that point and remained that. And we know that. We knew that was real. I was sitting in a different seat when the pandemic hit, and it was community-based organizations that stood up when large bureaucracies couldn't, and got devices in the hands of young people and got food into families' hands and supported folks who had rent issues. There was so many, just inequities that had existed long before the pandemic that just were exacerbated. And so our work is about how do we interrupt systemic racism, generational poverty, how do we ensure to build generational wealth in a different way in our community, and see all of the potential and possibilities of the tenacity, the resilience of Bronxites, and support it by bringing resources that haven't been here to our borough through the Community Foundation.
Yeah, I know one of the things we also talk about in our community is the need to pay particular attention to a couple of things. We've got gentrification at the forefront. We've got
Mhm.
disinvestment, and even from a political point of view, we see the gerrymandering of particular districts. How do you see these things, and can you give us a little bit about what you like to see happen and the work that you do?
Well, what I'd love to see happen is that that we shift shift gentrification from gentrifying our communities to create change, to ensuring that the people in our communities have access to new housing, new small business opportunities, and so that we let the folks of the community benefit from all of the amazing resources that are coming in, from the new developments to new business opportunities, that we really create a pathway for community members to benefit from that. And I think that is so important for this community, where, for generations, Bronxites have stood up and said, this is our community and we're going to remember, we're going to be here, and we're going to be present. I also think it's important that we move towards ensuring that we're providing access to resources in a very real and distinct way. One of the things we're doing is partnering with the Bronx Defenders to build a cannabis hub. And that is the place to ensure that the social justice commitment that was made to ensure those who were justice impacted by cannabis have access to those licenses to create those businesses. And those are the kinds of things that we want to do. We want to make sure that our people, the people who've been here, the people who've raised their families here, the people who've spent generations here, actually benefit from the transformation that's happening across the borough. I say over and over again, if you want to transform New York City, if you want to create a New York City, it starts right here in the Boogie Down Bronx.
The Boogie Down Bronx it is. And speaking about the Boogie Down Bronx, there's a reason that you know that it's the Boogie Down Bronx. You're from the borough of the Bronx, as well as the founders, Desmond and Derek Lewis. Talk to us a little bit about your background and why this has become a burden and a passion for you.
Yeah, so Derek and Desmond, born and raised in the Bronx, and really see themselves as the products of philanthropy, and so have chosen to give back to the community that's given so much to them. I got to be real, because people call me on this all the time. I was born in Queens, but I moved to the Bronx when I was 17. I've been here ever since, raised my family here, and still live here. I'm in the Bronx now. And, I also spent over 20 years in education in the Bronx. And, many of you know my most recent last stint in education was as New York City Schools Chancellor. And I say over and over again that, if not for the people in the Bronx who believed in me, entrusted me with their children, the leaders and teachers who followed my vision to do great work in schools, I would not have been considered as, to take over in the most important moment in New York City. But additionally, I think what's important about both Derek, Desmond, and I is, when you come from a community, when you raise your family in a community, when you live in a community, you understand the needs of a community in a very different way. It's what I call, it's the idea of proximate leadership. Those who are proximate to the problems, those who understand the community, those who understand the unintended consequences of decisions that are made, have the best opportunity to help solve those problems, because you bring folks in who know and understand. And I think that's what's important about us. That's what's important about the foundation. And that's what's important about this moment. And it's even more important for folks who want to contribute to solving community problems, to building strong, to identify and see those of us who are of the community, those of us who come from the community, as part of the solution.
when we look at what goes on in our community, I know one of the things that we really talk about is that in communities of color, and you know this working in the Department of Education and working in the Bronx school system, that there's so many young people who've been affected in the area of the digital divide,
Yeah.
where we don't have access, and it was assumed by a lot of people as soon as COVID hit, okay, well we'll go home, we'll go to in-person learning, but there's so many people who struggle with internet use. There's so many people who
Hmm.
struggle with not having a lack of adequate technology or less than sufficient technology. What do you see right now about that digital divide? Has it been bridged? And what's the Community Foundation doing in terms of trying to step in and really address this matter?
Well, we have to continue to work to bridge it. We cannot allow the gap that exists between people in the world who have access to computers, access to mobile devices, and access to internet. We can't allow there to be a gap between those who have and have not. That can't exist, especially when we recognize that we had to stand up a whole school system, and there were too many young people who didn't have access at that moment. And so, what the foundation did in that moment was create a digital equity coalition, a coalition of over 70 community members who looked at ways to address the digital divide. And one of those ways was the launch of the Gigabit Center, which happened in late June with Mayor Adams. And it is a place and a space where community members can have access to digital programming, Wi-Fi, broadband, and all of the things we need to make it a reality. But we must continue to move the work forward. We need to ensure that the Bronx does not have any digital deserts, that divide doesn't exist, but that all of our communities, all of our buildings, all of our housing developments have high-speed internet access on a regular basis. And the foundation is working to continue to do that with many of our partners.
And talk to me about this matter right here, because when we talk about racial justice,
Hmm.
one of the things that we're dealing with at the forefront in our community is that I think when you talk about George Floyd, you can talk about Eric Garner, you can talk about all kinds of different things that we've seen in and around our nation. But when it comes to the New York City, we have seen a large push in the area of racial justice and helping organizations that are actually doing that work, because many times they are often underfunded and and many times grassroots. Talk to me about how the Community Foundation is wrapping their arms around the racial justice issue and supporting those organizations that really have racial justice at the forefront.
Well, identifying and solving and addressing issues of racial justice are a priority for us. Again, in the Bronx, this is not a surprise. It is not a new thing that occurred because of a pandemic. It didn't occur, because of George Floyd. We had our own stories of young people and men of color being, killed by police officers or in police custody, right? And so we want to bridge many, many gaps. We want to bridge the relationships between community, police. We want to ensure that our elected officials are recognizing on the ground. And we're so proud of the way our electeds are showing up in this borough. And they've been some real partners to say the Bronx now, we need to ensure that the brownest borough in New York City, because we can't forget that as well when we talk about racial justice. The Bronx is the brownest borough in New York City. We need to make sure that the brownest borough in New York City gets what it deserves. We also want to ensure that we're identifying nonprofits that are doing great work that don't have access to resources because they're not the kind of regular groups that folks always go to, but they're doing great work in the community. The Knowledge House, MASA, there's so many amazing organizations that are doing great work in the community that we need to make sure have access to resources and funding in the way many of the large nonprofits who have been here a long time and have been deeply committed to working in the Bronx have as well.
Yeah, I want to take you back for a minute. I'll put another hat on. Just go back to 2021. I remember when Meghan Markle came, and you had the opportunity to really sit next to her and have some conversation. Have an opportunity to talk to her about students, about things of that
Yeah.
nature. Give me a little bit about that moment, because I'm always interested to know how people who are international and those on the outside see our city, see our communities, and particularly a person such as a Meghan Markle. Can you give us a little bit of insight as to her thoughts as to what she saw and
Well, what's interesting is that, what we know, right, like from just the news and social media, is that she's had her own struggles, right, as a Black
Hmm.
woman in this moment, in her own life. And one of the things that what we got to do together was actually share a book that she wrote, a children's book that she wrote with some students actually in Harlem, in a school in Harlem. And what she really talked about was being intentional about writing a book that showed diverse characters, that showed diverse experiences, and making sure that she was bringing that not only to schools and communities across the country, but in her own home as she raised her own family with her own children. And I have to tell you, because you asked, they were both quite lovely, and quite humble in just being honored to be in spaces with young children and in schools, and really honored the adults in that moment who were really doing the most important work.
Yeah. And when you talk about embracing diversity, I think that's really what it's about, right? I think that we have to do a better job of embracing diversity. But unfortunately, in communities of color, that doesn't happen. But with organizations such as yourself and the Bronx Community Foundation, you really have an opportunity to really give those organizations an opportunity to have a foot up. And I tell people all the time, it's really not about getting a handout. Is in as much as it's really getting a hand up,
Mhm.
and the work that you're doing really puts people in a place where they can receive a hand up to embrace that one word, right? Diversity.
Yeah. And, I'm with you, right? A hand up, but also a partner who wants to
Right.
support you along the way, who believes in you, who sees you and recognizes the great work that you're doing in the community. And so that's who we want to be. We want to say, we want the world to know, right? Like there's been this narrative about the Bronx that we are excited about changing, because what we know, those of us who raise our families here, live here, grow up here, there is so much diversity, so many different communities that live together, exist together, share culture, food, dance, community, knowledge, education. And, this is the moment, this is the time for the Bronx to really be seen for the potential that lives and exists in this borough.
Well, Dr. Porter, I want to ask you the question for Bronxites and those across New York City who want to support the work of the Bronx Community Foundation. How do they go about supporting and being an active participant?
So they should feel free to follow us on social media at the Bronx, on all the handles, but also our website, www the Bronx, we got it, thebronx.org. No one understands how that happens.
uh,
But just follow us, follow our work. And you'll see, if you go into our social media today, tomorrow we're celebrating nonprofits, like I said, with Deputy Borough President Jeanette Peguero, our comptroller, Brad Lander, and Deputy Mayor Sheena Wright, who's also from the Bronx. And so we'd love to have nonprofits join us for that as well, and just look forward to continuing to do great work together.
Well, Dr. Meisha Porter, I want to let you know it's been an honor to have you here on the show, and thank you so much for the work that you're doing at the Bronx Community Foundation,
Yes.
and that the great work that continues. And certainly come back and visit us again.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me.
Oh,
Remember
yes.
the Bronx.
All righty. Dr. Meisha Porter, our guest here on the Social Justice Forum. Listen, we want you, don't go anywhere. We've got more show coming up. The Social Justice Forums continues in just a few seconds.